Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. This past week, someone who I really looked up to passed away, and I reached out to Albert Wong, who was his aide during some of his time as Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, to talk to us a little bit about the Honourable David C. Onley, who was the 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Albert had the privilege of serving him as one of his aides during his tenure, and I think, Albert, you're going to tell us a little bit about that experience, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say about him. I got to tell you that I met the Lieutenant Governor on numerous occasions at different functions that I was at, some of them with you, frankly, and he was really a very impressive gentleman, and one of those people. And I've read numerous different stories about FDR. One of those people who I would imagine after a while you just didn't realize he was disabled, and disabled wouldn't be a word that would be appropriate to describe his abilities, because this man, in talking to him after a while, you just sort of forgot about any lack of ability that he had. He was really quite a intelligent man, a compassionate man, an articulate man, impressive man. And I think served us extremely well as Lieutenant Governor. But Albert, I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about your memories of David Onley, the 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for having me here. And thank you for allowing me to speak about a remarkable man. As you said, he had achieved so much that sometimes you forget the limitations that he faced. He had polio as a child. And that had affected him for the rest of his life. And that didn't stop him. He became a journalist, and then was appointed as Lieutenant Governor. And then after his tenure as Lieutenant Governor, he became a lecturer at the U of T to talk about disability rights and and also about the monarchy. He was tireless. He worked very hard at getting things done. Even though it looks seamless to us, to the average person, I will tell you that it took a lot of effort on his part. So something as simple as what you and I would do without even thinking about it, such as driving into a parking spot, getting out of the car and going to the building, required a lot of thought, planning, and effort on his part. So for him to get out of the car and onto his mobility scooter, was quite a challenge for many times with him, and then to get into the building was also a challenge. So he became he was a champion of disabled rights and accessibility, but he defined accessibility in a much broader way. He defined accessibility beyond the curb cut, the elevator, the automatic doors, and all those other things that the ramps that we put in. He was very interested in bridging that gap, which is, we got you in the door. Now, how do we make sure we employ you properly? So that was his champion, and he really pushed it hard on that. So some of the memories I had with him was getting to see him meet people, from queens and prince to the average person. The number of people who come up and say, I remember David Onley from his time as the weatherman and then a journalist at City TV to now, is quite remarkable. For all types of, all folks to come up and say that. So that's my memory of him as well, Brian.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more in just 2 minutes with Albert Wong and understand a little bit more about how Albert knew him well, because Albert had a really unique opportunity to work with this gentleman. And so in just 2 minutes, we're going to come back and chat a little bit about that. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight, I want to do a little bit of a tribute to the Honourable David C. Onley, who was the 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. And my guest to speak about him is Albert Wong. And Albert, you had a really unique job in interaction with the lieutenant governor. You were his chief aide. Is that correct?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the role that you played and what you did in that role.
I was his chief aide de camp, and what a privilege that was. You know, Brian, we meet a lot of people, and that's we interact with a lot of people, but there's always one or two when you finish the interaction says, man, that was special. This is something that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. And David Onley was one of those. Mr. Onley was one of those. And he appointed me as the chief aide to basically, he has a number of aide de camps, and these are military folks, and some of them are from the police services and the fire and the paramedics, but basically uniformed people who would go with him to the functions, the different events that he goes to ensure that the protocols is correct, and to facilitate the movement of the event, and also to highlight the stature of his office, because as the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, he's the Queen's representative in Ontario. He's the highest office holder in the province of Ontario, so he's the only one in Ontario that has an aide de camp. And so I had a cadre of what 68 aide de camps.
68 aide de camps.
Because we're all volunteers, and so they will volunteer their time to be with His Honor, and that's how we worked it. But I got to, because I was his aide, I got to know him very well. I got to know. I'll tell you, I got to see different aspects of him that maybe others don't. For example, everybody understands him as a journalist. They saw him on TV. They saw him as the Lieutenant Governor. I saw him also as a loving husband. His partnership with Ruth Ann Onley was something else to behold, because she was beside him. She's the one that got him helped to get him ready for the day, for example. He used to tell me that it would take him a number of hours to get ready for the morning. You just don't get up, jump out of bed, grab a cup of coffee, and be on your way. For him, it takes a long time to get his body moving, to be ready to even get into the car. But yet, he was always on time. He was always prepared, and he was ready to go. And that's remarkable to watch. He's a loving father. He loved his sons, the three sons, Jonathan, and his three sons, and it's just remarkable to see that interaction the sons had with him, and because in their eyes, their dad has always been in a scooter, a person with mobility issues. Yep. But yet there they were as a family. So that's one aspect that I saw. The other aspect that I saw was how prepared he was. He always took everything with grace. So in any meeting or any event that was required of him, he was always prepared. And he always did it with grace and dignity. That's what I saw. Whether it's the opening of legislature with the throne, speech from the throne, or installation of a new government, or a community event, he always approached it with the same zeal, the same effort, and the same dignity. So that's what I really saw from him. That was different.
The role of the Lieutenant Governor, do you think it's an important role in our democracy?
Very important, because you see, we have a democracy that is a constitutional monarchy, and a constitutional monarchy is based on the fact that we have a government that is formed, but all the powers are vested on the monarchy. And so as the Queen's, at that time, the Queen's representative, now the King's representative in the province, everything flows from them. So the Lieutenant Governor is responsible to ensure there's a government, a functioning government. So she would ask someone to form a government. But the other part of the constitutional monarchy is that the government, it's a responsible government. The government is responsible to the legislature. So all the powers are not vested in one person, but it's actually diffused. And because of that, we have a democracy, and the Queen exhibited that very well. The Queen exhibited a constitution that was able to evolve with time. And that's important. You know, when I think back of the passing of the Queen, and that was quite a momentous occasion in our history, we had the Queen shepherded us through an era where there was significant changes from the end of the Second World War to all the things that happened in between. And yet, here we are, the old British Empire dissolved, but in its rise came the Commonwealth. I cannot think of another empire that could ever do that. When you look at the Austro-Hungarian, all the empires that during the First World War that broke apart. And so we have chosen, in a way, our democracy, that it will be a constitutional monarchy. And that's how we govern ourselves. The Governor General is the King's representative for Canada. All the court cases, as you can see, for example, in our criminal courts, is Regina versus Albert Wong, for example. So then it's not just Brian Crombie versus Albert Wong. So, or the state versus. So that's how we have decided to govern ourselves. And I don't want to get into a very long lecture about what constitutional monarchy is, but I think he had a very important role. How he played the role, how Mr. Onley played that role was vital. Because he consulted widely. He deliberated very carefully. He met with the Premier on a very frequent basis, just as much as the Queen would have met with the Prime Minister of England and the Governor General.
So, lots of us have watched that miniseries Crown, where there's these weekly meetings between the Prime Minister and the Queen. Were there weekly meetings, regular meetings between the Premier and the Lieutenant Governor?
I cannot speak to the frequency because I was not in Queen's Park all the time. I was there when the function decides, but I know they have had regular meetings, and that's it. And she has the power to convene and the power to consult. And I think, he had, and I think he did he can tell just by the fact that everyone left feeling empowered. The other thing that I must mention is that the Lieutenant Governor, and they got this very carefully. Lieutenant Governor is bipartisan. And that's the other unique feature of our constitutional monarchy, that it's not based on party politics, that the head of state is not based on a party or another party. And so that's very different. And so he consulted widely. He consulted with academics. He consulted with a wide range of people as he conducted his tenure as Lieutenant Governor. And I should say also, as Lieutenant Governor, he's the head of state, Ontario. So that's what's so different about it.
So, tell me what you think the difference is between Canada and the United States. In Canada, the head of state is the Governor General, and in the United States, it would be the President. In Ontario, the head of state is the Lieutenant Governor. In New York State, it would be the Democratic governor that's elected every 4 years.
Right.
Which is the better system in your mind?
I can't. Yeah, I rather not, because we're here to remember David Onley, and it's not for me to debate which is a better system. I will point out that in the United States, the head of state is the president, as you said, but he's also the head of government. And so the difference here is that in Canada, the head of state is the Governor General, and the head of government is the Prime Minister.
Right.
So that's one significant aspect in my mind. Whether one is better than the other, I'm not here to debate that. But what I'll say to you is, because I live in Canada, I served in the Canadian Armed Forces. I would defend Canada. This is the system I'm defending, the constitutional monarchy.
I do think the constitutional monarchy is a better system, and I think that separating out the head of state and the head of government is a very positive move, because I do think that your point about having someone that is the head of state that is nonpartisan or bipartisan, as you described it, is strong and beneficial. And I think David Onley, more than almost anyone else, but I think numerous different lieutenant governors, as well as governor generals, have have been similar to that, you looked up to them. Unlike too often there are partisan prime ministers or premiers that you won't look up to, and or some people in the population won't look up to for partisan reasons because they disagree with their policies. But David Onley just carried himself in such a way and carried out his duties in such a way that I don't know anyone that didn't look up to him. He was just a very impressive gentleman. And I think the fact that he did all of that with his disability is incredible, absolutely incredible. And I think he gave an example of tenacity and of persistence and of just getting on with life and not, and he spoke about disability a lot and making sure that we had, as you say, things like curb cuts and accessible buildings, etc. But he also just sort of showed by his example day in and day out that disabled people are just as important to society as anybody else. And he was an inspiration in that regard, was he not?
Well, I would, if I can pick up on that, Brian, and that thread, he made it seem, as you said at the very top, you almost forget when you watch him work that he was disabled, but he was. It took a lot of effort for him to do what we would do. And the other thing was that he had to be careful with his energy level, because unlike you and I, he cannot recharge because of the nature of his body as well as we can. Having said that, he would also tell you at the time that he was Lieutenant Governor, there was about 900,000 people with disability in Ontario. And he always said that if you hired someone who is disabled on your workforce, you will likely have the most loyal employee in your company, because that person is not going to jump to the next job. That person's grateful for the job that they've got. Because you see, the reality is the unemployment level at that time, it still is, I believe, the unemployment level of the disabled population is the size of an unemployment level during the Great Depression. Really? Okay. And the other reality is that when you have a disabled person or a number of people in your company, the workman compensation claim for that group is the lowest for your company. Because the reality is when a disabled person is very aware of the limitations of his or her body, very aware. So that's the person that will not be jumping up on a three-legged stool to reach up for something high. Whereas, Brian, you and I will probably do that because we're foolish enough to do that. So you have a dedicated, loyal employee will come to work every day because they're grateful. And you also have an employee that will not be cutting corners safety-wise and will get the job done. And so his challenge to us was to consider why the unemployment level of this population is so high, where it's almost the same level as the Great Depression. And then he points this out. That's well, at that time when he was the Lieutenant Governor, about 900. He estimated it was about 900,000 Ontarians who have a disability of some sort. When you add their parents, their siblings, their immediate family members, you almost reach to half of the Ontario population that are affected in one way or the other by someone who's disabled. So maybe it's time, as he would say, that we start seriously looking at how we can better gain a foothold, economic foothold for this population, the employability of this population. And so he would say that his understanding, his vision of accessibility goes beyond the curb cuts, the automatic doors, the ramps. Instead, it goes into the area of how can we better employ this person? How can we make use of those talents? How can we use and the skills that they bring. So that's where he championed, and that's what he kept pushing. Haven't got there yet, but that's what he was pushing.
Well, in the diversity discussion, often people will say diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice. And I think what David Onley did is he talked about disabled people should be included in workplaces and society and in parliament and the legislature and politics just as much as anyone else. I want to.
So could I just add, maybe
Certainly.
in disability, accessibility must lead to inclusion. It's not only good enough to get you in the door, but what do we do once you get in the door is the key question.
You got to be included.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah, I think that's what he's asking for.
I want to end, if I could, by reading the tribute that you posted because I think it was very heartfelt. You've said most of this, but I want to repeat it if I could. The Honorable David C. Onley was the 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, and Albert had the privilege of serving him as one of his aides during his tenure. And Albert's experience with this kind, gentle, and compassionate man will remain with him for the rest of his life. David Onley helped Albert Wong to see and to understand a world that was unfamiliar to him, to recognize the visible and invisible barriers that challenges all of us, and gave us the courage to work to overcome them. David Onley told Albert once of the enormous effort it takes for him to prepare to get ready for work. And yet there he was, as Albert said, on time, prepared, and ready to start the day every day. The Honorable David Onley's deep and abiding love for Ruth Ann, his wife, and his love for his sons, Jonathan, Robert, and Michael, and their families was limitless. David Onley, the 28th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, served Ontario well. And Albert, myself, and I think all of us will certainly miss him. Rest in peace, David Onley.
Yes, thank you. And you know that I will come back to this last point if you don't mind. I know we're running down on time, Brian. It was his partnership with Ruth. You got to appreciate they married when he was in the wheelchair, in the scooter, and he's also a man of faith. I should have added that he's a deep faith. And that's what carried him forward. But his love for his sons, and then by extension, their wives and their spouses and their children, so his grandchildren, is truly remarkable to see. Because here's a man by all rights was fatigued, was tired, and yet he had all the time in the world for his sons. And that was really a lesson for me of what I can aspire to.
Albert Wong, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing with us your memories of David Onley, the
Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, who left us just last week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
We're going to take a break, and after the messages, come back with a tribute to someone else that is very close to me. Stay with us, everybody.